You are now tuned in to the PPC Podcast. Subscribe now for more exclusive content.
All right, we're live. So, Portsmouth Property Connect. We don't even know what to call this podcast yet because Matt and I have literally just made a decision to come here, sit here, have a conversation,
spit some out.
Yeah, and see what this turns into. But welcome, thank you for joining us. My name's Kobbii Nyarko.
And I'm Matt Marsh.
And today we're literally just going to have an easy conversation about the UK economy, how things are looking at the moment, how it's affecting property, but more specifically when it comes to mortgages, because this is what Matt specializes in.
Yep.
So thank you for being in the room today. So before we even get into all of that, I want to start nice and simple, and just go with your background so people get an idea of who you are. I know you've been in mortgages for a very long time, in finance for a very long time. I think I saw 13 years on your...
more than that.
Is that more than that? Don't look it though. Don't look it. So yeah, you've got a lot of knowledge and a wealth of experience. So yeah, if you want to give us a sort of a statement on your background, how you got into sort of the position that you're in now.
Yeah, no troubles. So back in 2001, decided to leave the Royal Navy. Lobbing torpedoes out of submarines wasn't really transferable into the real world, but I was good with numbers, and I ended up getting a job in a bank, and that I was just doing loans and bits there. And then I heard about this company that was doing mortgages, and as I was now in the financial institution, I went and did that at a brokerage for a few years for another company. And then in 2005, decided was doing well enough out of that to start running my own brokerage. Did that until the fated 2008 when we had the credit crunch. Still carried on doing mortgages, but started working with local Portsmouth estate agents to just try and diversify because mortgages were getting quite tough back then. Got more and more involved in property through doing that. And started working more regionally across the southeast for various different agents, but still moving a bit away from broking. But back in 2018, I decided I really want to get my teeth back into mortgage broking again. And I opened up RBM Solutions, which is essentially my kids' initials, Reese and Blake. And we've been going strength to strength from there. So all in all, I've been in mortgages now for over 20 years. Wow. So yeah,
that's actually the first time I've heard you say that. Obviously we've done a few bits together and known each other a little bit now, so yeah, 20 years.
Yeah. That's why I'm great.
That's really good. So this is what I'm saying, someone of your experience is great to speak to, especially in this day and age with everything that's going on. So I just want to quickly go back to 2008. So leading up to that, there was a lot of risky borrowing, lending, which eventually caused the bubble to burst.
100%.
So in hindsight, are there any experiences that you had around then that stand out during that recession time?
I think whenever there's a recession, and we've seen it in the past or historically, normally you know it's coming. You can see it. But I think because of the risky nature of the way that lenders were operating, we had 125% mortgages. We had self-certification mortgages. Basically, there were lenders out there that were saying, just tell us what you earn. And they weren't actually backing it up or checking it out. And I know that there are some firms out there that would say, oh, you're a cleaner, so that means you run your own cleaning firm, does it? You must be on 50 grand a year. Self-certification mortgages, when you think about it as a risk profile, that's nuts. But because there were so many mortgages being sold, what they were doing is they were saying, all these banks and building societies were saying, look, we're selling loads of mortgages. So all of these people would invest in them and think, oh, wow, look at these guys. They look amazing. So because it was artificially good, but there was no risk being taken, because it was assuming house prices would always go up and everything else. And it just got to a point where it got so big. And then, especially in America, which always ends up translating over here, the bubble burst.
Yeah, big time.
Because people were refinancing, not really caring about fees because it was being put on top of the mortgage. And then all of a sudden, it hit a point where these debts are going bad. And they're going bad fast. And then all of a sudden, it's shut down. So then rather than there being a peak and then a drop, it ended up being peak, slam, shut. And then it was literally like
Crazy.
Mortgage companies going out of business, banks closing the doors, and obviously the big bailouts that we ended up having to come from the government to keep the banking economy going. So there was 1,000,001 lessons that could be taken from what happened in the credit crunch. And obviously it can be a pain in the bum because of the regulation, and it does put a lot of things around what we can do, but it is sensible. It does make more sense.
Yeah.
You want banks to be lending responsibly.
Of course, yeah.
So the individual can sometimes see that as restrictive. Especially the common argument is, well, I pay that much in rent, why can't I pay that as a mortgage? I can deal with that later if you want. But it's more about they got to show they're being responsible, because they don't want to cause the knock-on effect is if they are irresponsible when they're lending, it will have a knock-on effect for the wider economy, just as it did in 2008. So it's where would you want to start with? What lessons can you learn from 2008? But in a nutshell, the three key areas that they're a lot tighter on now are the affordability. Can you prove it? And you got to think of it in terms of, I try to keep it nice and simple in all terms. So if I didn't know you and the bank doesn't know you, and you said to me, Matt, I want to borrow £300,000 and I didn't have a clue who you were, I'm going to say, right, okay, can you afford to pay it? Can you prove it to me that I can see that you've got the money to pay it? And if I'm looking at it thinking, well, I still know you've got to pay your car, you got your gas, your electric and everything else you got to pay, I'm going to work that out. Go, do I think this guy's going to be able to afford to pay it back? I'm also going to look at your risk profile, which is why the credit search is important. I'm not worried about credit scores. A lot of people get obsessed with what their score is. It's more about what is the detail within your credit portfolio. So if you borrow stuff, can I prove that you pay it back?
Okay, yeah.
And also, how much borrowing do you have? Are you living off of credit all the time? So are you actually affording it? So if I see, for argument's sake, you said, Matt, I want to borrow 300 grand. And I looked at your credit profile and I could see, well, you've got 4 credit cards and they're all maxed out. You pay them all, but they're all maxed out. I'm thinking, am I pushing him too far by giving him this extra money?
Of course, yeah.
Because I can see that he's racked it up, but he's paying the minimum all the time. Does that mean that he's at the edge of his afford? Even though you might look like you can afford it, I might be thinking from a risk profile, can he afford it? Or is he just keeping on borrowing? And then the third, so you've got, that's the affordability, that's the credit criteria, are you paying it back? And then the third one is, well, what's the security like? So if you said to me, what do you want 300 grand for? And you said, well, I want to buy a house for 500 grand. I'm putting 200 grand of my own money in. I'm going to be thinking, okay, but if I lend it and he doesn't pay it back, even if the house prices drop, even if he doesn't look after it, the likelihood is I'm going to get my money back. I can at least do that. And is the house, is it made of bricks or is it made of twigs and berries? If it's made of twigs and berries, I'm not going to want to borrow it. Or if it's a caravan, you can take it away. I need to know that that's there. It's a real thing. It's tangible. And if it went bad, I can sell it. It's in good condition. If you said to me that, Matt, I want to borrow 300 grand and the house is worth 250, I'll think, well, even if you don't pay it, I'm never going to get my money back. So that's why deposits are needed. And when you combine all three of those, it circles back to, well, if I can pay £1,000 on rent, why can't I pay £1,000 a month on mortgage? Well, the very simple answer to that is no asset. So if you don't pay rent, they go, okay, off you go, out you get, and you can be out within a few months. If you don't pay the mortgage, you're sitting in their big asset. They've lent you hundreds of thousands of pounds, and that's why they need to be more risky. And that's the very simple answers to that one.
Okay, so that you're saying all of this, and obviously I think in 2008 I was 17. So I'll be honest, I had no clue what was going on. All I knew is everything was shutting down. I'm getting a part-time job, I'm getting paid. So I didn't really think of anything then. Now I'm an adult and I'm looking at it. So back then, those 3 bits of criteria that you've just described. So am I right to assume that not everyone was thinking like that? Like they weren't looking to get those bits of information before they give out mortgages?
Well,
was it a free-for-all before that? Like,
if we take the first one, security. So if you had a really bad credit profile and you weren't able to prove your income, they'd still lend you around 95% of that property's value. So I could turn around. So self-cert mortgages was what they used to be called, where you would just make a declaration and sign. No pay slips, no bank statements. you're making a signature to say, I earn that much. And then all the lender would do is a plausibility check. Is it plausible somebody could be earning that? And they go, okay, fair enough, that's plausible. And they would sign it off. So they're one of their 3 core areas of risk is being ignored, because because there's so much competition for mortgages, that's how so many people got on the housing ladder so quick. Northern Rock famously doing their 125% mortgages. Now, what they actually did was 95% on a mortgage, and then 30% as an unsecured loan over the same terms and rates as the mortgage. But and no matter how well you slice it, they were lending 125% up to that. So you were borrowing more than what the asset was worth.
Yeah.
And as far as your credit was concerned, nowadays, if you've got adverse credit, you're very lucky to get through with a 10% deposit. 15% typically lenders start lending, because what they want is they want some skin in the game, hence your deposit, in case it goes bad. And it depends on the level of adverse. Now, you could have people, I remember from the criteria, they would turn around and say, if you've had 2 or 3 missed payments in the last 12 months on your mortgage, which is quite big from lender's point of view, they would still lend you around up to 90%. Nowadays, pretty much all lenders need you to be clean on your mortgage payments for the last 12 months. Because while some of them can be flexible and they can turn around and say, look, we understand people have problems, things happen. If it's historic, more so, mostly after over 3 years, but anything small within the last 3 years, you go, right, is there a reason for that? Or is it just because I just didn't pay attention? Then they're going to not be happy with that. But if you say, look, there was a bereavement, I lost my job, found another job, it's a life event, makes much more reason. But back then, they didn't care. They goes, did you miss that money? Yep, well, it fits on this scorecard, that's your rate, that's your payment. And people were going, great. So they weren't. This is why so many debts went bad, and that's what caused, in a nutshell, the collapse of the economy, because it wasn't just here in the UK; it was in the US and other places. Of course, as well they were doing it.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on slightly, because we could talk about that all day, to be honest. But for anyone who's watching and wants more information on this, watch The Big Short if you haven't seen that movie.
Yeah,
it's an incredible movie. I've watched it more than once, because I think at the time I just really wanted to understand it a little bit more. And it's actually a funny movie to watch. So if you can, and you have the patience, you have some time on your hands, sit down, dissect that movie for sure. It will explain a lot of the background of what Matt's talking about here.
There's also a UK one that they did as well. I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, it's a really good one that they did.
Oh, you're going to have to let me know which one.
I'll find that out and let you know. Yeah.
I just want to move on to interest rates, inflation. From 2021 up until 2023, we can even, later on we'll go into 2024. So just to sort of lay a foundation of the conversation, in December 2021, the bank rate went from 0.1% to 0.25%. 14 consecutive bank rises later, the bank rate went up to 5.25% in August 2023. So a year later, where we are now, it's just dropped by 0.25%. Within this time, inflation steadily rose to 11.1% from March 2021 to October 2022. So within this time, things got a little bit tricky. The war between Russia and Ukraine obviously kicked off as well. There were quite a few things happening in the world at that time. And obviously you also had, which we might even speak down the line about this, the property inflation as well in 2022, especially in this country. Portsmouth specifically, I know for a fact that property prices went up consistently month by month. And properties were being sold very quickly as well. But then that all came to a halt come 2023. And things got a little bit tricky. Just in hindsight, looking at that, are there any experiences you can share within your work during that time, over the last 3 years or so?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of reasons for that. We take COVID first and foremost. Now, I was very reluctant to get involved in anything when furlough was a thing, grants, bounce back loans, etc., etc. The government had to basically find a mega pot of money to fund everything to do with COVID, grants, supporting And whatever your politics is on that, yes, they got things wrong. They got some things right. Some people needed that, but they needed to do something.
Something, yeah, 100%.
And I'm not going to say not going to get into politics of whether that was right or wrong.
Nah,
However, the money was put out there. Money was going to need to get paid back. All right. And the problem is what it did, it was almost like printing money. You just pumped a load of money into the economy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people now who benefited off of that, and let's be honest, a lot of people didn't need that money as much as they said it. There were some people that absolutely needed that money. Of course they did. But there was a lot of people that applied for grants and got bailouts and bounce back loans that they really didn't need. So what they did is now there's a load of people out there that are not doing anything and thinking about, how can I spend my money? Yeah.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, everything eases. We've all been sat there, not doing a lot, thinking about what our next move's going to be. Then they go, all right, COVID's done. And everybody's like, right, cool, let's get out there. The government are now thinking, how are we going to make money? We need to launch some schemes to get people buying again. The housing market is very, very central to the whole economy.
100%.
So what it did, it went, do you know what? Stamp duty break. And the UK went bonkers for it.
Yeah.
And we ate it up. And people were paying way over asking price for houses because they were like, I haven't got to pay any stamp duty. In hindsight, a lot of these people were spending 20, 30 grand more than the house was worth to save 10 grand's worth of stamp duty. A lot of that was because there'd been such a stagnation of people not moving that would have naturally moved in 2020, 2021.
Of course, yeah.
That they were naturally going to move anyway.
Yeah.
But what it did is it rose their house price. They were getting a lot more. They were spending a lot more. So now all of a sudden, house prices are worth a lot more. And then you got the other people that found that the house price was getting out of reach and they were spending a lot of money on their homes to do what they wanted to do to their houses.
Yeah.
Spend. And they dropped the rates down low because they wanted to promote that spending because the government makes their money on the VAT and the goods that we buy. So because they needed that money back because they'd spent so much, and that's what partly caused the spike in inflation. Then obviously the war in Ukraine, and this kind of amplifies the fact that we're no longer an island nation. We are obviously geographically surrounded by water. But back in the 60s, 70s, we farmed our own fields, we supplied our own electrics, we made our own cars, we manufactured anything you needed was made here in Great Britain. So we could be an isolated economy. Didn't matter what was happening in the rest of the world. Now, because goods got really cheap in China and Taiwan and places like that, it was so much cheaper for us, rather than paying English wages, buy our goods from overseas, get our gas from overseas, get all of these other things from overseas, which we were paying peanuts for. War happens in Ukraine. Now all of a sudden, the price has gone right up. And now it starts to make an impact of, well, we need that gas because we need it to fire our stations, our power, our lots of other things. And again, because of COVID, because of gas supply and everything else, petrol, trucks, everything getting here, the cost of the supplies like wood, metal, grain,
jumped,
all goes up. That's all adding to inflation. Because the cost of it, people are spending more to get all of this done. All of these factors combined meant that when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng decided to come out and say, no, we're going to keep it low. The rest of the world that does buy its goods from us, or that we buy goods from them, thinks, that doesn't look sustainable. How are you going to afford that, if you keep your rates low? So all of a sudden, the rest of the world's thinking, you're almost looking at our credit rating in the UK going, don't look as good as it once did. So they start to think, well, we're going to start pulling our money a bit. We're maybe not going to sell to them as much. We're going to make it a bit more expensive.
I know Brexit had a big effect on that as well. Obviously that happened before COVID, and I think COVID kind of shadowed it a little bit, like just took it over a bit. But once a lot of workers actually left the country, once Brexit hit, I think that had a big effect on the economy. Even up until now, because there's still a labour shortage.
100%. And I think that, again, it's showing me age, but I remember when I used to go to bars, restaurants and places, and it was filled with 17, 18, 19-year-olds from the UK. And then all of a sudden we got the influx from Eastern Europe, and they were beginning to, you'd find them doing a lot of the jobs and building and labouring and things like that. And I would even say that there was a mindset that these were deemed to be more menial jobs,
Yeah.
but they were prepared to work hard and do them. There was some rogues within that, but there was also a lot of quality within that.
100%.
And then a lot of the people here in the UK didn't like it because it's like, they're stealing our jobs. Well, no, they're doing the jobs that we're not prepared to do.
Yeah.
And then you could put it akin to the Windrush generation when they came along to support the economy and do that.
Yeah.
But I won't go down that.
Yeah. Another time.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where Brexit, again, we've got to renegotiate deals. COVID came at a really bad time. I mean, not that anybody could have predicted it, but on top of Brexit, it just compounded it, and the labour shortage and everything else. So yeah, and I think we found that across the board that it's taking longer to get stuff. We book things in, builders, labourers, supplies. It costs more, and it takes longer. The more delay that there is in the system, the more expensive everything becomes. So if you've got a builder on site and he's waiting on things, he's still going to be charging for the time it's taking him to do stuff. So yeah, there's so many spices thrown into that recipe
100%.
as to what's caused inflation to spike, which caused rates to go up because we had to kind of match what was going on across the rest of the world because we couldn't keep our rates low. And that caused a massive surge, knock-on effect. We've been so used to, since 2008 till now, paying 0.25% or so, to now it's back to pre-2008 rates, where it typically used to be. But because we've got a whole generation that's been so used to having rates really low, it's a switch in mindset and having to get readjusted to this.
So, with all that being said, first-time buyers at the moment, it's a little bit of a tricky time. What are your thoughts and like what would be your advice in that respect with when it comes to like first-time mortgages, considering what we're going through at the moment?
Okay, well, the lenders are trying to get out there and do it at the moment. There's obviously 5% deposit is typically what you need. There's even a lender out there, if you've been renting for the last 12 months, that will base it on the affordability of what you've been showing that you can prove to pay.
Okay.
So there are certain schemes out there that can allow that. Obviously, you have to prove it and all of those various other bits.
Of course.
Lenders, from the affordability, it's not as cut and dry as X amount times your income. They do that. So 4.5 times is pretty standard. 1 or 2 will do a little bit more. But they will base it on the affordability. Does it look practical? And they'll check things like bank statements, the credit report, and see that. So, for instance, if I was earning 30 grand a year and I had no debt, I would probably be better than somebody earning 40 grand a year, but I've got a car on tick, I've got credit cards, and I've got this, because of a lot of that other money is being spent out. So I need to be able to show what else am I affording. So there's that side. The credit side, they can be a little bit more lenient. Like I say, going back to, they can have the odd little blip here and there, but as long as it's more historic and the more recent history is looking good. And there are other schemes as well, like they call something called joint buyer sole proprietor. So let's say you like a guarantor mortgage, but it could be anybody sometimes. They can go on it with you to help boost your income, to help give you that extra bit of a leg up. So there are other schemes that can be done for first-time buyers. So yeah, it's not so bad. It's just, again, getting used to the fact that the rates are more expensive. And if they're a first-time buyer, let's be honest, they're not going to know any better. It will just be what it will be. I think there are some times where you'll find that you could look at a mortgage and think, I could buy a house. The lender might say you can borrow a lot more, but you might say, well, actually, I don't want to pay that much each month. What I want to pay each month is this. And I think it's going to be based on that. But yeah, again, it depends on what you're looking at buying. If you're buying just to get on the property ladder, you might be wanting to look at where you are in 2 years, especially if your income's likely to rise considerably, or whether you're buying on your own. Would you meet somebody? Do you start a family? Just things like that. The things that on paper that the banks don't necessarily consider, I think that the individual should consider is things like, well, what's my next move? To think about whether or not they do the 5-year or the 2-year, or they look at something different and make it tailored to them. So,
considering the market at the moment, within your work, are you seeing much first-time buyers coming to you still within this market?
We are, but I think that's part of the reason why house prices have come down a little bit as well, because when mortgages are more expensive, then all of a sudden, if I was buying a house for 200, 300,000 5 years ago, when the rate was 0.25, it's only costing me 700-800 quid. Now it's costing me 1,100 quid. And I got to be asking myself, with the added cost of fuel and everything else being more expensive, my average household living cost has gone up. Do I want to spend that money on that property for 200, 250, 300,000? I might bring it down a little bit. But we are seeing first-time buyers come into the market, but they're being a little bit more conservative about what they're spending because of where the rates are now.
Yeah. Cost of living and everything as well.
Yeah.
So what would you say to landlords,
Okay.
for example, for buy-to-let mortgages and that sort of stuff?
Landlords are getting a lot more diverse with how they're doing things. So before COVID, before 2019, everybody was thinking rates are cheap, and it's I could buy 2, 3, 4 group portfolios quite quickly. The rates have all gone up, and the house price is steadying off, has meant that it's squeezed their margins, which is why it's caused the knock-on effect on the rents going up. Ultimately, landlords that have bought privately have done so because they haven't done it out of charity. They've done it because they want to make a profit. And they're not... I think landlords get a bad rap. Ultimately, if I was running any business, whether it's renting a house out or selling goods, if my cost's gone up, then my price has to go up.
100%.
And it's the same for landlords. Their costs have gone up. And if the renter wants to have a sustainable house, then the landlord's going to need to have to afford that, and therefore there is a knock-on effect. And with the margin, because of the taxation and the way that they're taxed on it as well, there's not as much profit in it as people think. And landlords, I would think, need to be maybe a little bit more aware of: am I doing this for the monthly gain, or am I doing this for the longer term gain? As in, am I buying a house that's going to be worth a little bit more, so come 5, 10, 15, 20 years when I go to unload them, has it made me more money? Is that my aim? And I'm quite happy to break even, or make a teeny tiny bit of profits. There's enough in the pot so I can maintain the property, do all the other things.
100%. I think that's a great point as well. I think landlords, yes, they definitely do get a bad rap. I think most of the time, especially with the thing that they're looking to do with renters reform bill and that sort of stuff, it's more about the quality of the landlord and the work they're actually doing. Whether they're actually working in favour for their tenants, or if they're literally just there to pick up the money. When your tenants are calling, you're not picking up the phone. And those sort of things. I know obviously in Portsmouth you've got HMO additional licensing, which is trying to get rid of those rogue kind of landlords who are trying to capitalise and just make money rather than actually thinking about the welfare of the tenants. And I think it's the combination of both. Yes, rents are going up, but then there's a lot of tenants who are unhappy with the way they're being treated by landlords. It's that balance.
What we've also got to accept, if we accept that tenants need protection, so you get your gas safety, electric safety, your regular inspections on the property, and the maintenance and all the rest of it, which are the costs that generally seem to be forgotten about. Because, yes, the rent might be £1,000 a month, and the mortgage for the landlord could be £500 a month. But when they're paying their accountancy, they got to pay their tax, they got to pay, and all the other various bits and bobs, and the maintenance of the property on a regular basis. If it's empty for a period of time, there's lots of other things to consider. So it needs to make sure that it's working out for them. And whether or not then the landlord then thinks to themselves, am I happy with it breaking even? Or am I doing this for the long-term gain? So when the house is now worth, for argument's sake, 200,000, but in 5, 10, 15, 20 years when I want to let go of it, it's worth 300, 400,000 or whatever it might be. Are they doing it for that? Or are they doing it for, I want to really try and maximise it per month for me? So what are they looking to do? Now, interestingly, we saw the average portfolio size of a landlord increase. But I think that's because your accidental landlord, i.e. somebody that's just inherited a property and decided to let it out, or a couple that have moved into one house and let the other one out, they're still about and they'll still happen. But I think the people that had only bought one or two and got early into it and were struggling then maybe to get the next one. Because what we'd seen a lot of landlords do before was buy, sell, flip it, get the money out of it, then buy more, do the same, maybe rent one or two out and grow their portfolio that way. House prices aren't going up. House prices have dipped ever so slightly. So they can't rely on that same growth. The cost to them for the renovations because of the cost of materials has gone up. So there's less of that. And over 2023, we didn't really see any movement in the buy-to-let world because the rates were going up, which was really chewing hard into any profit that there was for a buy-to-let landlord. Lo and behold, over the last few years, what we've started to see is much more HMO business, much more looking into student lets, social housing lets,
service accommodation,
massive, and even letting to the commercial sector, so getting employees finding houses for them, and converting the high streets that are going out of fashion, but converting those into more resis, make more units that way. So they're getting smarter, but I think it's more of the investors that have been in it for a while, that have been lucky enough that have seen all the growth since house prices have gone up in 2010, 2015 and so on. And they've grown their portfolios. And because the equity within their portfolio is larger, what we find is when you get the landlords that have had one or two properties that now need to sell to get out because they're stuck with these high rates, maybe even making a loss each month. So the more experienced landlords go, yep, we'll take that. Yep, we'll take that. And it means that their portfolios are grown. And also because they're buying a big house, chopping it up. Now I've got more lets. So it's just to being a bit smarter. But the good news is there is many different ways now to go at the buy-to-let market rather than you can still do your standard ones. There's still money to be made there because of the large rents that you're getting. Mortgages have gone up, but so have the rents. And I would say that the rents prices going up has exceeded the amount that the rates have gone up. So your margin is actually slightly more nowadays. The appetite for lending is a bit tricky because on mortgages, what they class as the lenders class as the stress rate has increased. So while you might say pay 4 or 5% on the mortgage, the lender's stressing it at 6-7%. But then they're also adding in 25% to allow for rental voids, maintenance, agents' fees as well. So it means that meeting those stress tests means that lending's a little bit harder, but it has got easier since 2023 to now as the lenders are adjusting as much as the market is adjusting. But now it's all cooling off. I don't think it'll go back to where it was prior the rate rises. But I do think we'll start to see a more healthy but more diverse landlords buy-to-let portfolio.
That leads on great into the next point that I wanted to touch. So leading up to the last bank rate update, I put a little poll on the Portsmouth Property Connect Instagram and asking people where they thought rates would go or what would happen. I was one of those people thinking it would stay at 5.25%. I think it was only you that said it was going down to 5. I didn't get many votes, but you're one of those people that ticked on and you said it's going down. And it did go down. So I just want to understand your knowledge of that and why you thought it was going down.
I think that the general forecast is that we're expecting rates to potentially drop down a little bit further still. But this is the bit that I don't think many people maybe get. Now, I do think that the rate drop is also like a bit of an artificial drop. Reason why I say that is the Bank of England base rate is now 5%. And most of the high street mortgages you get that are being charged are lower than that. I'm oversimplifying, but think about if the Bank of England rate, what the banks are borrowing money for each other at, is 5%, but they're charging less than that. It's a bit like Asda or Tesco's buying in their goods, but selling it cheaper. And it would seem, well, why would they do that? Well, if we think about it historically, the stock of the banks is the money, and they haven't really been able to lend that money over the last 18 months or so because of the rate rises.
Of course.
Mortgages dropped by about a third, if not more, over that period. Wow. So there's a stockpile of money that they need to lend because if they're not lending it, they're not earning the interest on it.
Of course.
So they need to get rid of it. So how do you get rid of it? You sell it a little bit cheaper, but you also create more interest in the market by, actually, maybe it's not as bad as we thought it was. I want to get involved.
Yeah.
So they start lending money. So what we would see is the base rate come down, but there's going to be a point where it's going to typically, the Bank of England needs to get below where lenders are charging at the moment. Now, when the rates come down, what I do think is going to happen is 2-year fixed rates have been more expensive than 5-year fixed rates recently. I do think that now there seems to be a bit of an impetus that rates might start to creep down slowly and gradually, that 2-year borrowing will become cheaper, but 5-year fixed rates will probably stay around the same. What is a headline rate, which gets people grabbing for, I want to borrow money, is when it dips below 4%, which we've seen one or two of the lenders do now.
Okay.
But it's more of a rates have dropped, and then everybody's going, has my rate dropped? What's happening on the market? Can I get cheaper deals now? And it's wondering then whether or not that's the right thing to do to get involved, or what type of mortgage to get involved in then. But what we're going to see is those rates will probably hold over a while, and very, very fractional drops. So if the Bank of England drops by 0.25%, the lenders might drop by 0.5. Okay. 0.05, sorry.
Yeah.
So it's a fractional drop, because it does eventually need, the Bank of England should start to come below what the lenders are then charging. Longer term forecast. So it's got to be gradual, because otherwise, as we've seen 100%. Recently, inflation will spike.
Yeah.
And if it's sustained inflation spike, then what will happen is then the rates have to go back up, because it needs to keep everything under control, because uncontrolled spending creates a cost in everything else.
Of course.
So we need the rates to be to reach some sort of parity. And then we should be able to see things being a bit smoother. So if they drop rates, then drop rates, then drop rates, or even instead of 1% drop, then all of a sudden people think, wow, there'd be a clamour, and it'd create lots of a bit of a surge, but it would be almost like an uncontrolled surge. We don't want too much money going back into the economy, otherwise we end up exactly where we were last time. It becomes cyclical. So it's got to be controlled. So my general feeling is, assuming that there are no pandemics, wars, financial meltdowns anywhere, is that I do think that the Bank of England base rate over the next 18 months will come down to 4%, maybe even down as low as 3.5%. Again, lots of variables within that. That it could come down to that, with the lenders charging their small margin above that once everything settles. That's what my longer term forecast is, which is encouraging. What could happen is we get close to Christmas and everything's moving smooth, but then if rates stay there, they feel, hang on a second, the market's not quite going as quick as we wanted, the economy's struggling a little bit, new governments, not just here but overseas. How's it all looking?
A lot going on.
Then it could all of a sudden go, hang on, maybe we've overcooked this, maybe we need to put the rate up a little bit. So in short, if you're thinking, I really want to take advantage of all the rates going down, you've also got to bear in mind and be guarded against, but there could be something that could happen that I'm unaware about and I have no control over that could cause those rates to either stay or go back up. So the risk needs to be, which is why I base it very much on personal circumstances, is yes, you want to benefit if they go down, but can you sustain it if the rates go up? And when you're trying to forecast that 2, 3, 4 years down the line, it's really hard to forecast. No one wants to miss out.
No.
So if I recommended you a 2-year fixed rate, and then but the rates actually steadied off and went up, you'd be kicking yourself that you didn't fix him for 5, or blaming me. Why didn't you fix me in for 5 years? Well, we didn't know. And if I've told you to go for a 5-year fixed rate and they kept going down, you go, why did you fix me in for a 5? The truth of the matter is, no one can say accurately, as we've already mentioned, the banks 5 years ago didn't have a clue where the rates would be now. 3 years ago, before the rate rises, they were still charging as low as 0.8%.
Crazy.
Just 3 years ago. And now we would look at that and go, oh my God, how did they not know? And this is the banks themselves that are lending the money. So we've got to bear that in mind. So it's a risk and reward. If you can't risk that payment going up any more expensive, do what's safest for you. And the last thing I'll say is, be mindful of not chasing variable or tracker mortgages at the moment because, for instance, you can get a fixed rate mortgage for around late 3s to early 4%, whether it's 2-year, 5-year fixed rate at the moment. Now, most of the tracker mortgages are still tracking about 0.25% to maybe more above the Bank of England base rate.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So if somebody said to me, Matt, I want a tracker or I want a variable mortgage so I can get it to go down in line with things moving, then what they got to be mindful of is if the rate goes down, the rate will normally go down by about 0.25% of the time. So it's going to take a while before it comes down to where it was fixed.
Yep.
And even if it went below where the fixed rate is, then it might be, let's say you did a 2-year fix and in the last 6 months, it's now 0.25% cheaper. You spent 18 months being more expensive. So net, you're actually paying a lot more.
Yeah.
You've not really benefited. Yeah, each month it's gone down, but if you'd have been on that 2-year fix from the off, it would have been better than being on the tracker. But 100%. We've got no idea. So again, are you prepared to roll the dice on that?
Yeah.
And if you're happy to take the risk, there's your reward. If you're not happy to take the risk, stick with the fixed.
Makes sense. The only last thing that I really wanted to mention is so the MPC, which is the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England, it's a group of 9 members.
Yeah.
5 voted to reduce the bank rate by 0.25%, and the remaining 4 wanted to keep it at 5.25%. So even that, it's the decision of one person that's more or less allowed it to come down. So you can see that the Bank of England are still wary about bringing it down.
100%.
But then at the same time, that's the decision they've made. This is where we're at the moment. And on a month to month, obviously I keep my eye on it. I do report on it on LinkedIn and that sort of stuff. And I'll put information below for my LinkedIn and Matt's LinkedIn and anything else that might come with that as well. So you can check and just see how things are going. But then I definitely want to do more of this.
Yeah,
sitting down, talking, especially when these things kind of happen. And then, just seeing what sort of information we can get out to the people so they have 100%. A better understanding of what's going on, especially with your wealth of experience and knowledge as well.
Happy to do it.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention or say?
No, I think it's 8 times a year that they come together. So rather than every single month, and it varies on so many different factors. This and remembering that the Bank of England is not led by the government.
They're their own separate entity.
Absolutely right. So we got to remember that the government can put pressure on them, but they don't have to do what the government says. It's understanding that they're trying to look at the numbers at the end of the day. And it's all risk and reward. And the other thing is as well is to remember, while I'm looking at it from a mortgage point of view and a borrowing point of view, we've got a culture that wants to borrow rather than a culture that wants to save. And while it's been amazing for borrowers, it's crucified savers. But now the rates have gone up. You can actually start saving some money and seeing some money back on your investments now. I'm not a financial advisor on investments and things, but there is a positive side to that, and it's balancing the economy to make sure that we stop having a yin and yang, back and forth style economy. So it's got to keep things stable. And I think that while we're all clamoring for, I want a cheaper rate, I want to get on the housing ladder, I want to do this, I want to refinance, I want to move. Of course we do. That's the industry we're in. But we also have to balance it on so many other factors. And I do think that the drop that's been made recently is purely to stimulate the economy in a steady, progressive way that isn't detrimental. And that was the reason why it was so cut, because it is going to be slow progress if we see it. Barring a pandemic or something daft, but there you go.
Last thing I want to say, I just want to give a shout out to Spark Community Space. This is where we're at the moment, doing this podcast. To be honest, nowadays I think to myself, what would this place be without Spark?
Yeah, man.
Because they do so much. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Spark, especially Becky Simmons, who runs it all. Emily, who's helped me out today, putting all this stuff together. My guy behind the camera as well. But aside from that, we'll probably call it just before that runs out. Subscribe, Portsmouth Property Connect on YouTube. Leave some comments below as well. Let's get conversation going. And for sure, me and Matt will definitely do this again at some point and talk a bit more for you. So, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully catch up with you soon. Take care.